Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name's Renee LaValle McKenna, and I bring my 30-plus years as a recovering addict and ex-crazy person turned therapist and shamanic healer to bring you snackable teachings on spirituality, psychology, and all things personal growth. And today I want to talk about sacred contracts. And sacred contracts could be seen as the soul-level agreements that we make for the circumstances and relationships in our life. And the thing I find really useful about approaching both relationships and many of the situations, particularly the difficult and painful ones, as agreements or contracts, is that it actually puts us in a position of power as co-creators of our own reality and can move us from a place of victimization and powerlessness to a perspective of curiosity and constructive change. And we're talking meta level here. Sacred contracts or soul agreements are happening on the deepest level for our highest good, our evolution, our learning, and personal growth. And they often have nothing to do in some ways with our personality self. And I say they're separate from our personality self because on a human level, no one wants to be abused, impoverished, mentally or emotionally dysfunctional, or to suffer physically. And when we talk about things on a soul level, it refers to the aspect of ourself that perhaps existed before we incarnated into this little human form, and the part of us that will continue on. And on a soul level, the growth and evolution of our consciousness, the elevation of our resonance with the larger consciousness system, the dissolving of our ignorance, our misconceptions, our fear, our sense of separation is much more important than simply avoiding our suffering. In fact, pain and suffering are part of the design, and so are joy, love, connection, and fulfillment. Pain and suffering call for change, and happiness, progress, joy, and fulfillment point us in the optimal direction to make those changes. It's like having an internal gyroscope. I think that joy and suffering are the drivers for this evolutionary process we're all participating in. And what our soul wants for us or from us may be different than what our ego or personality self wants for or from us. And that gap or misalignment between soul and ego is generally filled with that suffering. And I use suffering in the largest context, including fear and anxiety, worry, depression, boredom, unhappiness, stagnancy, emotional pain, physical pain, mental illness, and mind dysfunction. And sacred contracts fall into the same category as the Buddhist and Hindu concepts of karma. I did a podcast, Karma and Family of Origin. It's number 48. And there are many, many ways to understand karma, even within Hinduism and Buddhism. But sacred contracts are a little bit different. And some of the modern spiritual teachings of Abraham Hicks, Bashar, and the work of Eva Periakos in The Pathwork, which is one of my personal favorites, all point to this idea that in some way, before we incarnate into this lifetime, that we actually agree to many of the circumstances and situations that will unfold, because those circumstances and situations will help us grow. That the details and happenings, the connections in our life may not be coincidental, that they provide a kinesthetic experience that will push and pull us toward greater truth, wholeness, and the fullest expression of our essential nature as individual units of consciousness in a larger consciousness system. Little pieces of God, learning to be godlike or goddess-like. I find it interesting that most of that material, Abraham Hicks, Bashar, Pathwork, is all channeled information, accessing higher consciousness that's trying to cheer us on and give us guidance and direction on the spiritual evolutionary path. The sacred contracts that I'm talking about are even more specific than that. And the sacred contracts I'm talking about really brings the rubber to the road with this perspective by looking deeply at the intimate relationships in our life. Now, we can look at the peripheral relationships as well, but the intimate ones are the ones that hold the most information. And the intimate relationships in our life don't actually have to have a lot of intimacy. In fact, that might be part of the problem. And certainly any relationship that causes us problems can benefit from this deeper inquiry. So I'm talking about lovers, husbands and wives, close friends, bosses, coworkers, subordinates, teachers and coaches, family members, mothers, fathers, sister, brother, grandma, cousins, neighbors. Really, any relationship that has energy and impact on our life could be seen as a sacred contract. And the thing I love about approaching relationships as agreements is that we have the opportunity to change those agreements or rewrite those contracts at any time as adults. And it is often our disempowerment as children that calls us to authentic empowerment as adults. And again, this is why I talk about this on a soul level rather than a personality level, because on a personality level, no one wants to be raped or abused or neglected, abandoned, tortured, all the horrible things that can happen to us on a human level. But when held from a soul level perspective, we can move from a place of being victimized by the dysfunction, fear, and ignorance of others and use that for fuel for our own personal growth. And it's really common to become stuck in a pattern of suffering or dysfunction in relationship. And it's often very easy to see what's wrong with the other person and where they need to grow and change, and to hope or wish or try to get them to do personal growth work so that we'll be more comfortable. And that's usually not very productive. In fact, trying to get other people to change so that we will be more comfortable is usually part of the pattern we're stuck in. And I like to call that kind of a pattern hopeless hope. Now, I'm all about real hope and the possibility for genuine change. It happens all the time. My life work with myself and others is all about growth and evolution. But when we view relationships as an agreement, we need to look at what we've agreed to. What's our part of this dynamic? Where am I being called to grow and change? What is my soul trying to learn here? It's said that we always have 3 options in any situation. We can accept what is, we can ask for change, or we can remove ourselves. And we might not like those options, but they are options. And we do have free will. Whether we choose to use it or not is usually the question. So I'll give a kind of dramatic example, because I have a lot of those. So I had a short marriage in my late 20s. He's dead now, not by my hand, although I did contemplate taking him out more than once. It was probably the most intensely painful relationship I've ever had, and he's one of my greatest teachers. One night, he was sleeping on the couch, which he did most of the time, and I stood over his sleeping face with a big frying pan and thought I could smash him right now. And I realized that wasn't a good idea. And it was probably another 1.5 years before I actually kicked him out. He was handsome and charming. He was great in bed, but he couldn't hold a job. He couldn't tell the truth, and he couldn't stay sober. He was a terrible husband. He was a pathological liar and a pretty good con man, but he actually also had a really loving heart. And on a personality level, we were completely codependent. He was unable to take care of himself, and I did everything I could to take care of him. Buy him things, help him get jobs, which he ultimately always lost. Take care of him after the many accidents that he had, which rendered him incapable of working and needing a constant stream of pain meds. And he was always trying to get it together, and I was always trying to help him, and he could never do it. And I have a pretty strong will and a lot of life energy, and I poured all of it that I could into trying to save this man from himself. And my own motive for trying to save him was that if he could be healthy, then maybe he could actually love me, support me, and be the partner that I really hoped for. And that was a hopeless hope. That marriage ended in divorce and bankruptcy for me, and I was obsessed with whether I should stay or leave that relationship pretty much from the time it started. But my abandonment issues were so great that at that point I could not bear to be alone. In fact, it was after the ending of that relationship that I became willing to really look deeply at my relationship patterns and took my first 6-month period of intentional celibacy, a life-changing experience that I was completely unwilling to do up to that point. But early in that marriage, I realized from a series of readings I was doing through Unity magazine and some of my spiritual advisors, it became obvious that my husband was a symptom of the problem, and the problem was mine. That of all the men that had wanted to marry me up to that point, and there were a few, I had picked him. That my picker was broken, and that rather than trying to find another person who was the right person, that I needed to become the right person. And that perhaps I should stay in this circumstance and learn the lessons that it was bringing me so that I wouldn't repeat it again. And that's what happened. And I came to see that that relationship and all the dysfunction of it was a huge distraction. It sucked all my life energy. I had no opportunity at all to go to graduate school, to write my book, to actually pursue my own career because I was so busy cleaning up messes from him. And part of our agreement on a soul level was that I will pour all of my life energy into trying to save you from yourself, and you will pour all of your life energy into distracting me from the things I'm most afraid of. And we were actually agreeing to support each other in staying fearful and small. And the suffering of that fear-based, low-level agreement actually propelled me to be able to do those things, to write my book and go to graduate school later on. Now, sacred contracts can be positive as well, of course. In fact, in my own personal growth, I try to have as many co-supportive agreements in my life as I can. And when I or my partner sees dysfunction in it, the work is to see where we're being called to grow. And often the growth is the ending of the relationship. Sometimes it is bringing my focus to things outside of the relationship, or to be different within the relationship, which calls both parties to grow. I have a couple of really long-term girlfriends, 20 and 30 years, and we have been able to grow together. And sometimes there's gaps where we aren't connected very much. Recommitting to those friendships continues to bring us forward. Supporting each other, wanting to be healthy, and wanting the highest good for the other, whether it includes me in their life or not. In each relationship, each person, each contract we make is unique and often quite complicated. But these contracts can be renegotiated, and often they need to be, like updating your iOS. We need to update our functionality in our relationships as things change, as they always do. In fact, it is often in trying to keep things the same and fearing or resisting this evolutionary pull that makes things painful and dysfunctional. So even in a great, stable, healthy, supportive, loving relationship, the contracts and our participation in it is going to need to change over time as the circumstances change. So I encourage you to look at the relationships in your life as if they were sacred contracts, and to ask the questions, where am I being called to grow? Or what does this relationship have to teach me? And if there's difficult or painful patterns in these relationships, to ask myself, what is my relationship with this particular suffering? And is it rooted in fear or is it rooted in love? And I could give you a lot more questions than that, but you might have to book a session if you want to do that. And I do have some spots available. If anyone wants to do any individual work with me or find out more about my mentorship program, you can shoot me an email, info@reneemckenna.com. You can check me out on Instagram. I'm doing lives a couple times a week, usually Mondays and Fridays, @ReneeLaValleyMcKenna. Getting ready to release our open door growth course on Intro to Shamanism. If you want to learn how to apply the powerful practice of shamanic journey work for healing and insight, guidance and empowerment in your own life. There'll be updated information on that on social and on my website. If you'd like a free download of the first chapters of my book, Allies and Demons, Working with Spirit for Power and Healing, there's a link in the show notes. And thanks as always to my generous supporters on Patreon. Thank you so much for listening. Blessings on your path until we meet again. This is Renee LaValle McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.